Well, that's a tough reading. And I know 3 years ago, when it was the lectionary readings, I avoided it and spoke about the Hebrews passage that I read to you earlier. If you think about it, when you look at those first few verses, at first reading, it doesn't necessarily sound like good news, does it? You know, you thought I came to bring peace on earth? No, but fire and division. And he, then goes on to spell out the division amongst family that Jesus came to bring. For most of us, we kind of look at that and think, well, I thought it was supposed to be good news. I thought Jesus was all about peace and bringing people together, not about division and fire. Because we love family. We love our families, and as a general thing, we love the notion of family. We invest a lot into it and make it a huge priority. And if you were to ask most people, they would do anything for their family. Most mothers or fathers, if you said to them, if there was a dire need and you had to protect your family from someone, would you defend them and even take a life in order to defend your family? Most would say yes. It seems there's almost no lengths that we wouldn't go to defend, to save, to look after our own family. And then Jesus comes and says, I come to bring fire, not peace, and division to family. The conflict of following Jesus' way is often not between good and something that we should in fact hate, something that we should love on this hand or something that we should hate. That's usually not the kind of conflict that we find ourselves in. Those are easy choices. Those seem obvious and something that we can make and manage. But rather, the conflict comes when we're working between two kinds of good and we're not sure which one is the choice we should make. We love our family with everything we have, but then comes Jesus and calls for us to love him and to follow him. And that's when conflict happens. That's perhaps where it begins. It's interesting to think that most of the really wonderful things that happens in our lives happen to us in the context of family. But it's also true to say that some of the worst things that can happen in our lives also happen in the context of family. Just on Thursday, I had an all-day seminar on domestic violence and the way that affects and has a ripple effect right through people's lives. I get to see it as adults, young people struggling in marriage, and when you start to work with it, you find that often some of the worst things that are occurring now have stemmed back to their childhood and that they're brought forward. It's fair to say that families can be a mixed blessing, a mixed bag, if you like. Now, I'm sure that Jesus loved his own family, but it does seem that his relationship to the disciples was somehow more important than his own family. That bringing in the kingdom of God was more important than staying with his family and doing the normal family things. And we can see that his call to the disciples was that they should leave their families and their homes and their jobs to follow him. It's not that they had to never see them again or not love their family again. but they were called to leave them and go in a completely different direction. Following Jesus is no tame and sedate, pleasant Sunday stroll in the park. Jesus, you remember, has set his face toward Jerusalem. And the road to Jerusalem wasn't all beer and skittles, but the road in Jerusalem, if you think about it, was the road to Golgotha as well, and to the cross. I wonder whether we haven't somehow tried to tame that cross also. I was reading during the week about a minister who had a bounce-back email. So I don't know if you know the things, if you're into email much, but people use them. So if they're out of the office, maybe for a week, as soon as you press send on an email, you automatically get this reply saying, I'm out of the office, I won't be able to deal with this for the week or for a month or whatever it is. Well, this one minister had an email that would bounce back to you straight away saying this: thanks for your email. I do not respond to emails on Monday. It's my Sabbath day. I'm recuperating and recentering after a busy weekend of church responsibilities. I'm re-establishing balance to my life and to my family, and I'll get back to you just as soon as I'm refreshed. Nice email, I guess. But when we look at this passage from Jesus, I've come to bring fire, not peace. Maybe that kind of sentiment, that kind of email should be rewritten. Perhaps it should be something like this: thanks for your email. I don't respond to emails on Mondays because, fired up by worship and prayer and praise yesterday, I'm out and about with Jesus, disrupting life in this town. I'm shaking things up where I can, starting spiritual fires here and there. I'll be back in touch with you about boring church stuff later. That is, if nobody kills me for doing the Lord's work during the week. Does it sound a little bit silly? A little bit frivolous? Yeah, you like that one better? But isn't that what it should be like? That Christ within us fires us up? How many of us here today would respond if we were asked, yeah, I live a pretty sedate life, so I come to church for adventure? Anyone? Possibly not. We're more likely to say, well, I come to church for peace and for harmony and to be refreshed and nourished. That's more what we have in our minds, isn't it? But then comes Jesus and says, I came to bring fire, not peace. It's a challenging passage, isn't it? Most of us are looking for peace and happiness and refreshing. We're not really looking for more struggle and incineration. Perhaps we've tamed the message of Jesus. Perhaps we've made taking up our cross somehow an option in following Jesus, when it's not. Sometimes we try to make the gospel of Jesus fit into our own image and shrink it to our own size. It's a natural thing that we do with God, God who is way beyond us. We try and bring it into manageable understanding and contain it into an image that we can cope with. But that often means shrinking it somewhat. Then comes Jesus and says there are still places in this world where following him brings division and brings dislocation from anything that they might love more than Jesus. Division and dislocation from anything we might love more than we love Jesus. Perhaps we could rephrase what Jesus says to something like, I've come to make you agonize over the way that you spend your money. I've come to make you have really difficult conversations with your family about your priorities. I remember hearing just this week of a family that is being torn apart because this young couple, they just had their first child, but his side of the family, I'm not sure if I've got it right, but his side of the family are smokers. And when they go to visit them, they don't have a problem with smoking in front of the baby in their house, and, you know, the baby going over to visit and grandparents, they think it's their right to smoke in front of the child. Her side of the family is saying, that's abysmal and you can't do that, and it's not appropriate, and you should be telling, you know, your husband that you're not going to take the baby to that family, or they're not going to see the child unless they change their attitude or change their, you know. And you can see how the mother and father of this newborn child are now going, do we see that side of the family anymore, or do we lay down the line? And they're struggling with that. You or I might decide, well, that's an easy one, that's a no-brainer, but that's a family that's being torn apart over something simple that they believe in. What about the priest in France just a couple of weeks ago? Didn't he die doing the Lord's work? An 85-year-old priest, just an ordinary sedate life, you would have thought, until he's asked to stand up and be counted as a Christian by people who don't believe that's the right thing to do. Sometimes I think we could be accused of being fair weather Christians. You know, we're there in good times, we're faithful when it's all going good, but when things start to turn rough, are we still faithful? Are we still going to hold on to Christianity in the difficult times? Or like those friends that are there in the good times but then seem to be lacking when you really need help, the fair weather friends. Are we like that with Christ? And I think of myself too in our church and think, I know, and I've had conversations with people who've grown up in the church and been in church most of their lives, and when something difficult happened that didn't seem to sit with this notion of, but I'm a Christian and I've been praying to God and something terrible has happened, and if God's not going to protect me from those bad things, then I'm not going to be faithful. I'm not going to do all that work of being a Christian. And I think to myself, how did we let somebody go through 30 years of church thinking that that's how it was going to be? That no bad things would happen in your life if you prayed enough, or you gave enough, or you attended church often enough. Is that what we told you? Is that? Because when we look at this passage, that's not at all what Jesus is saying. Jesus is saying very clearly, we have to take up our cross. And he calls each one of us to follow him. And the road that he was on was not all beer and skittles. It was not just a fun journey where everything would be success. Now, I don't want to sound too doom and gloom about that. Following Jesus does bring good things. I want you to hear that very clearly. Following Jesus does bring good into your life, and a peace that the world can't offer you. That is true. But if we're taking this passage seriously and the words of Christ seriously, if we're going to follow him, it also means that things that we love might need to be lost also. That we might need to let go of some of those things. Those days won't be quite so easy. But that's what it means to follow Christ. So know that this is, I guess, one of those passages where Jesus is really honest with all of us who would want to follow him. And he says, count the cost of being a disciple. If you follow me, we go to a place where, the fringe benefits are out of this world. That's a joke, by the way. Out of this... So heaven, out of this... Okay. I'll try again later. He promises us stuff that is amazing. It is promises that the world cannot offer you. But it doesn't come with no cost. And it doesn't mean that if you're really going to prioritise that, there will be no conflicts about that. That there won't be family or there won't be friends or there won't be this world trying to drag you away from following Christ. There will be. But I want to finish just with those verses that I started with. As for us, we have this large crowd of witnesses around us. So then, let us rid ourselves of everything that gets in our way and of the sin which holds on to us so tightly. And let us run with determination the race that lies before us. Let us keep our eyes fixed on Jesus, on whom our faith depends from beginning to end. He did not give up because of the cross. On the contrary, because of the joy that was waiting for him, he thought nothing of the disgrace of dying on a cross. And he is now seated at the right hand of God's throne. This is the promise for us. Thanks be to God.